Aloha, broha! I'm the Merciful Zeus, and welcome to For Your Enjoyment, the show where we take a look at something awesome and ask, hey, you awesome? Why you so awesome? Allow me to present, for your enjoyment, ABZU. So ABZU comes to us from Giant Squid, a new studio founded by Matt Nava, former art director for that game company of Flower and Journey fame, and it continues on much the same trajectory laid down by its predecessors. Not really complex enough to be an adventure game or platformer or any other classical genre, but not mechanically simple enough to be a so-called walking simulator, ABZU's operating premise is essentially its opening scene. You're dropped into a fantastically stylized ocean, look around and see what you find. While the situation does get more involved as it goes on, that's really all you need to know starting off, because the ocean itself is really the point here, and it is more than enough to get things going. In many ways, ABZU is a spectacle piece, not the distant, detached kind where you just sit back and admire how pretty something is from afar. No, this is about getting right up into the world and losing yourself in it, and that is absolutely what makes it shine. It's the perfect intersection of art direction, technology, and atmosphere, all coming together to create a game world that hooks you all on its own without the need for a more complicated premise or mechanical foundation. You take one look at the time's almost ludicrously vibrant color palette, the encompassing sense of motion and energy, and the wonder of whatever next new thing will come rolling on up out of the water, and you want to see more. I mean, you've already been looking at the game in action for a little while here, and I'm sure it makes the case for itself better than I ever could. This is a game that loves its setting. While it's not exactly trying to be a Discovery Channel documentary, you get the unmistakable feeling that ABZU was made with a real love for all things oceanic, and it wants to impart even just the tiniest fraction of that passion to whoever sits at the controls. I think it was the local wildlife that really surprised me the most. While the decidedly non-realistic visuals, you'd probably be expecting something stylistically vague or perhaps even otherworldly about the creatures you encounter. That's certainly what I was expecting. But the game is very committed to surrounding you with real, existing species. You have a dedicated button to grab onto any larger animal that passes by and ride it around for a while, and as you explore you find these odd little fonts on the floor that spawn in a new species to populate the environment when you activate them. Both of these will detail the species name in the corner, and they're a great way of getting you up close with the locals. It's very telling that the game doesn't try to give these mechanics some larger significance in the design on a whole. You won't ride dolphins to gain some kind of dolphin power to beat a boss, as sweet an idea as that may be, and you don't summon a swarm of lobsters as a solution to some obtuse environmental puzzle. They exist purely as a way of tethering you to this world, making you a part of it and demonstrating that your presence there can influence it. But as I said, this isn't a documentary, and you aren't going to be learning interesting new factoids about the lifestyles of manta rays or sea turtles. But perhaps counterintuitively, this is also why it resists the temptation to make up some new alien ocean to go along with its exaggerated presentation. It isn't trying to represent what the ocean is, but what it feels like, displaying it through a magnifying lens of color and motion to replicate what I imagine it feels like to go diving yourself versus watching a recording of someone else doing it. The literal visuals may be the same, but the experience is going to be completely different. There's a nagging voice in the back of your head as you play that wonders if this is how, say, marine biologists see their work, while someone else may just see, oh, some coral and a couple of fish, no big deal. And it's really quite a fascinating perspective. Now, while they never reached quite the same level of infamy, and it's certainly not as much of an issue today, there was once a time when a water level would be thought of with the same frustrated impatience most modern gamers think of escort missions, or that brief early 2000s trend of the randomly forced stealth section. And so to anyone who got their start in those eras, the idea of setting a game entirely underwater may come off as something akin to the general response whenever a modern game tries to base itself entirely around ankle cuffing you to another character. But what this highlights is that even if there's no action, a game like this absolutely has to nail its controls, and thankfully it does. Mostly. You may find yourself stumbling a bit trying to maneuver in tight spaces, as the game does a lot of that automatic turning to stop you running into walls thing, but that's few and far between, and everywhere else you have full, beautifully fluid control to swim as you please, with animations of equal caliber to back it up. Now, I will say that if this game required more skill or expediency, they probably wouldn't function as well, since that fluidity is more the priority than precision. But with its sights aimed so firmly at exploration that you have no sights to aim, you're easily given all the tools you need to be satisfyingly present, and that feeling is easily their biggest success. But what exactly do you do with these controls? That's the question that games like this seem to get asked a lot because, well, the answer is so deceptively simple. You explore a progression of really excellently varied aquatic environments, with a bit of obstacle avoidance later on, occasionally stopping briefly to hunt around for controls to open doors, small camera droid thingies that follow you around, or the odd collectible if you feel like it. In its absolute simplest terms, you can think of it as Journey, but perhaps walked back just the tiniest step more, as there's none of Journey's light platforming to speak of. Now, while comparisons are a useful tool, describing a game entirely in terms of other games can be a risky move. Leave it at face value and forget about the contrasts, and you can do serious disservice to one or both titles. But here, well, this is the elephant seal in the room, isn't it? Because comparisons to that game company's masterstroke are more than just inevitable, it's right in the game's description. So it's important to establish right out of the gate that while the similarities are pretty obvious, ABZU never feels like a half-hearted successor or pale imitator. It's the Quake to id's previous Doom. You have to be sealed in an airtight concrete box not to pick up on the shared design trends and philosophies of the era, but you'd also need to be in a box just as impervious to overlook how different their respective tones and approaches to those design goals actually are. To me, ABZU actually feels more like the missing evolutionary link between Journey and TGC's other methodically hypnotic art box, Flower. See, Flower was all about this chill, serene effortlessness, but oddly enough, of all three games on the table right now, it's actually the most mechanically, classically game-like. Break down the experience, and the core of Flower is effectively score all the points and get to the end of the level. More than any of its fellows, it's practically an arcade game, but one that subs out the kind of rising tension in the face of escalating challenge you usually see with a relaxed, almost meditative attitude. Meanwhile, Journey was a mythic epic about the rise and fall of a civilization, a metaphor for life, birth, death, an exploration of companionship and communication, and a perfect note-by-note breakdown of Campbell's hero's journey archetype, all conveyed through an exploration-driven light platformer. So what ABZU does is it comes right along between the two of these, starting from Flower's peaceful meditation, but jettisoning the arcade-like elements and replacing them with Journey's sense of adventure. And, well, just darn it all if it doesn't mesh together beautifully. See, I think Journey was really less of a game about discovering and more of a game about learning. As visually stunning as the game world was, it was more about the things you find in it that help you progress and clue you into the story and all that good stuff. ABZU was almost the counterpoint, reversing this dynamic to make discovering and experiencing the world in its entirety more important than any one particular thing you might stumble across, because again, this is a game that loves its setting. This isn't a clear-cut and dry balance, of course, but it's a sliding scale that both games on a whole slide to noticeably different ends of, and it's one of the bigger, if perhaps subtler reasons why ABZU never feels like it's simply going through the motions of its older cousin, and this is unquestionably a good thing. Now, it may all come together beautifully, but flawlessly is another, much harder thing to pin down. If you were going to tie me to a chair and bitch-slap me with a salmon until I finally relented, I gotta be honest, even though I think I actually prefer ABZU's world just by the tiniest pinch, Journey still wins out overall. This is pretty much entirely because of all those story elements I mentioned are among my favorite narrative stuff I've ever seen in a game, and it's something that ABZU just doesn't have. Oh, it's far from entirely without context, but I think this might literally be as vague and hands-off as a story in an explorational game gets. By comparison, it makes Journey look so verbose and definitive you'd think it was written by Charles Dickens. There are some really great moments and discoveries it has up its sleeve that I don't want to spoil here, just on the off chance you haven't seen them somewhere else already, but it all amounts to more of a collection of applied metaphors than much of an actual narrative. Good metaphors to be sure, but not much more than that, and there's a part of me that can't help but feel like maybe it's just a bit of a missed opportunity. Granted, it's a hard call to make in a game like this because there's always that nagging thought of, well, maybe there was something I didn't see. But I explored pretty thoroughly, and the game isn't that non-linear, so I don't have the feeling that I missed anything of consequence. And if there is some additional clue that lent just that extra bit of solidity and context to things, well, Maybe, just maybe, that should have been brought into the foreground a bit more. But that being said, it escapes being what I'd consider a genuine criticism because the game never feels like it's trying to compete on the same narrative field that Journey planted for itself. ABZU is very confidently setting its own goals and achieving them remarkably well. My first instinct from all the way back when I was a kid is to approach games as a storytelling medium. And while certainly not every game needs a story, far from it, at the same time, if you have the space to explore something interesting without conflicting with any of the rest of your design, well, why not? And ABZU just happens to feel like it leaves that space open, ready and waiting for something that never quite completely fills it. But whether it's metaphor or narrative, ABZU is still essentially wordless either way. That means it's got to rely on something else for its emotional context, and that's where Austin Wintory's score comes in. And like you probably expect if you know his work, it's great. Just like how a score for Journey has this incredible intrinsic sense of the old ruins of a once mighty civilization and the unparalleled joy of flight, ABZU's music just is the floaty, all-enveloping feeling of swimming with all the best and most majestic things that 71% of the Earth's surface can cook up. While I really can't imagine another score better fitting the setting and atmosphere here, by much the same token as its narrative ambitions, there isn't exactly a lot of real solid structure or definitive motifs underpinning the music beyond a few scattered hints. You know that really powerful slice of bass cello that immediately starts playing in your head the moment you think of Journey? Yeah, you won't really find that here. Now that's simply another style, and that's perfectly fine. But personally, I tend to like my scores with a bit more of something you can really grab onto. Basically, I get the feeling that Journey's score worked better in 16-bit than ABZU's, for whatever that's worth. So that seems like a lot of things that Journey has that ABZU doesn't, but you know what it does have? The ocean. Oh my, that ocean. It really is just one of the most insanely colorful things I've ever had before my eyes, and I'd recommend it just for that alone. In case there was any doubt, this is Unreal 4 proving that it doesn't just do super realistic reflection mapping off your chainsaw bayonet as you drive it down some poor sod's throat. No, it's got style. The first time you come out of a cave and enter an area of genuine open water, or see a couple hundred fish doing donuts around each other in a feeding frenzy, are true standout visuals for this year, and the PS4 chews it all up and spits it back out without question. The resolution is crisp and clear and lets you see every little detail, and I only saw the frame rate drop incredibly rarely, basically only during one of those feeding frenzy moments, and you know what? Even then, it's only just enough to be noticeable, and with the sheer number of moving parts on screen at the time, I'm more than willing to forgive it. There are some really magic, surrealistic moments waiting for you, but my favorite stuff has got to be more of the little detail touches. This is some of my favorite water in a game ever. Sometimes it's so clear you'd almost think you were just straight up flying, but then it gets cloudier, and the combination of light rays and particulates and that look of things emerging out of the fog, except it's not fog because it's underwater, but I don't know what you call that. It's just really, really exceptional. Another thing I like is how in a lot of areas you're free to go up to the surface. There's not a whole lot to see up there, but it's got really great clouds. Seriously, I just really like these clouds, but it also lends a great sense of contrast between the world above and below, and I'm really glad it gives us that perspective to compare the two. Somehow the impact of knowing all this stuff is just waiting down there is a lot heavier. You can actually see it waiting down there. It's great stuff. ABZU is really an experience worth having. It might be easy to think you can see how pretty it is in all the screenshots and videos, but again, it's the same as watching someone else dive versus diving yourself. As with any game that has good atmosphere, being in the space yourself and being able to see it from every angle is something that just can't be replicated anywhere else. And in this case, that feeling isn't just part of the experience, it more or less is the experience. So with that, my highest recommendation goes to players who enjoy wrapping themselves up in a setting and not seeing daylight for a few hours, those looking for adventure without the usual tests of skill, and fans of strong art styles, with special bonus points to marine biologists, oceanographers, and James Cameron. But don't sweat this one if you like a genuine challenge or particularly involved mechanics, you like your stories defined more sharply, or you have crippling hydrophobia. Developers, or those who study games, should keep an eye out for art direction, juxtaposing surrealism with reality, wordless communication with the player, an interesting non-combat focus, and simplicity over complexity in design choices. So that's all the time we arbitrarily have for this episode. If you like what you see, maybe drop a like or subscribe. You guys are smart people. You know how YouTube works by now. You can check out Twitter for more up-to-minute news and random musings, and you can check out the channel for more awesome things you might like. I am the Merciful Zeus, and this has been Giant Squid's ABZU. For your enjoyment.